You've been working on an investigation on the power of ideas and how does public opinion shifts come up. How did this concern arise?
Well, I'm working with my good friend Wayne Leighton on a book. It's called Madmen, Intellectuals and Academic Scribblers, and the subtitle is The Economics of Political Change. Wayne and I are both professors of economics, and we teach classes in the economics of politics. That field in economics is known as public choice theory. Now, one of the things about this field is that there aren't very many offerings of textbooks, especially at the undergraduate level, in public choice theory. And both of us, as professors who teach this subject, we're motivated by the lack of offerings of books at this level. And that was kind of the original idea behind the book. It's moved along a little bit in terms of the basic concept, but you can think of it as we're triangulating between what is the economics of politics, applying that to current and recent issues of deregulation in particular, and then also writing for general readerships, not for professional economists. And so one of the things that we're preoccupied with is, as the subtitle says, is political change. And a way to think about political change is what are the roles and functions of government in society, and how do those roles and functions change over time? That's the basic idea with the book.
I think one of the most famous phrases about political change or the power of ideas would be one that even Friends of Liberty accept as true, which was said by John Maynard Keynes, who says that practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Do you think this optimistic position is that true? Or else why, if Friends of Liberty have been working on the ideas, haven't translated into political change?
Great question. And actually that passage is the inspiration for the title of the book, Madmen and Intellectuals and Madmen and Authority. And it really does bring back, to the issue of the role of ideas in bringing about political change or changes in the roles and functions of government. Now, Keynes is writing as an academic scribbler, in his own words, and he's advancing a new set of ideas about how the economy functions and what the government ought to be doing in terms of fiscal policy in particular to stabilize the macroeconomy. Now, these ideas, not immediately, but over the course of time, began to have more and more influence, not only among professional economists and their students and what's written in the textbooks, but also with policymakers in D.C. and Washington, D.C. and in other capitals around the country and around the world. And these ideas began to have an influence on ordinary people as well. And so, for example, if the economy, if unemployment begins to rise or GDP growth begins to slow, there's an expectation at all these levels, professional economists, policymakers themselves, voters and citizens, that government spending ought to increase in order to stimulate the economy. And so you have these. This is a change in the role and function of government that did not. It wasn't a function of government in the past, but through the creation of Keynes's ideas and their filtration into society, now that has become not only an acceptable role and function of government, but it's expected to play that role. And so one of the things that we can do is we can approach this this influence and this consequence of ideas using economic theory itself and treating it as a political matter. And so your opening was how public opinion can influence government. And what our approach is in terms of the economics of politics. We have a very simple framework put in that can be used to analyze not just fiscal policy and stimulus during a recession, but virtually any policy arena and any episode of political change. The idea is that through the confluence of people's experiences, the information that they gather, their worldviews, and so forth, public opinion can change over the course of time. This change of views, of worldviews and ideas, that becomes embodied in the institutional arrangements, in political institutions. And those political institutions, in turn, that helps explain how governments take on new roles and functions over time.
You say that an important application of this research you've been working on is on policymaking and especially in deregulation. Do you think there's a possibility for us to see in the future that, for example, the United States, which is what you're most familiar with, is going to start deregulating some of its key important industries? I would say that the public opinion would actually holds the opposite with stimulus spending right now or with the medical reform. It seems to be going the opposite way. Do you think it's pessimistic?
No, I think that you're putting your finger on something really important and also central to the book that we're working on. And the pendulum metaphor is not a bad one, I don't think. And I think that the pendulum of ideas has, in the past 3 to 5 years, maybe even the past decade since the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the pendulum has been swinging towards greater roles and functions for government. And we can learn from history, episodes of deregulation. We can learn more to answer your question about what might be, what the future might hold for more deregulation and for scaling back of government's role in society. So, for example, airline rate and route regulation in the United States. Up until 1978, the Civil Aeronautics Board determined how many airlines, whether there would be a new airline, which airlines serviced which routes, and also at what prices. And it was a very inefficient scheme. There was very few people actually traveling by air. It was very expensive to do so. And like with all price controls, the airlines began to compete on margins other than price, and that introduced other types of inefficiencies. And one of the ways that we knew that it was a problematic situation is that because the Civil Aeronautics Board only regulated prices across state lines, you could see, for example, a flight from San Francisco to Los Angeles or a flight from Dallas to San Antonio would be at market prices. And the same distance across state lines would be at Civil Aeronautic Board's prices, multiple orders of magnitude larger at higher prices from the CAB across state lines than within states. And so as information like this began to spread throughout society, and as the inefficiencies of airline rate and route regulation became more known, you had a shift of public opinion about it. And a lot of other things came into place at just the right time, and we tell the story in the book. But what ended up happening was through this course of ideas and then getting embodied in institutional arrangements, you have in 1978 the closing down of the Civil Aeronautics Board and the opening up of airline travel to market forces. And so I think that if we are going to peer into the future and say, can we be optimistic about political change in the future? I think on certain margins we definitely can. The issues of the day that you're talking about, healthcare, macroeconomic stability, housing price supports, other areas that are sort of big issues right now. Each of these areas doesn't give a whole lot of reason for optimism in terms of bringing back the role of government in society. But then, at some point, the pendulum begins to swing, and this pessimism shifts to optimism. And in our book, we're trying to reach general readers with our framework of how political change occurs, and helping people to understand these issues much better, hopefully.